Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The Little Craft House. I'm Nicole, thanks for joining us. Today we are going to be making a bunch of Hoop and Huggie earrings. Hopefully you'll get something out of this tutorial, whether you are a beginner or more advanced with your techniques, because there is something for everyone today. I had to control myself and not make too many, so the ones that I didn't get done for this tutorial you'll find over on Instagram on my Reels section, because I've become obsessed and I love making them. So I've been making quite a few. So anyway, let's get on with the tutorial and yeah, let's get started. Okay, so before we start anything, I should probably talk a little bit about the tools that I'm going to use. So I like to work here on my ceramic tile. I also have my scalpel knife. I have my flexi knife, nice and bendy. I also will be using my acrylic roller. And I also have my pasta machine over at the side. So in addition to using these standard tools, I'm also going to be using a few extra things. So I've got an acrylic plate here, which if you don't have one of these, I have substituted before with a ruler. I've also got an extruder. So if you don't have the extruder, the acrylic plate or something nice and flat will also work well. Now I've got some metal shape cutters here too. These cutters aren't just good for cutting out clay, they're also going to be used as guides for my hoops. So anything that's made from metal, wood, glass, it can all go in the oven. So I've even got these little paper towel rings here. So I've just cut them out from kitchen towel. These are super handy to have, as I do have a few different uses for them. A little recycling hack that I like to do here too is save the internal cores of the washi tape. So it's a nice thick cardboard, so it's a lot more sturdier than the kitchen towel, and I use quite a bit of tape, so I end up with quite a few of these cores left over. So it's nice to have a use for them. Right, so onto our first set of hoops. So I've got a piece of polymer clay here, and I'm just going to get it nice and conditioned and soft, and I'm going to make it into a bit of a small log-like shape. So just giving it a little bit of a roll. Doesn't have to be perfect at the moment. I'm going to decorate it with bits of all these little bits of scraps that I've been accumulating. So I really like that colour palette, the oranges and reds and pinks and things, and I thought it would stand out really nicely on this teal colour. So I'm just pulling, ripping and tearing at these other little bits of clay. I don't want anything to be perfect, I don't want perfect shapes, I just want it to be really organic looking. So just spacing it out around my piece of clay here. Right, so I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. There's lots of nice colour on there. Add that little bit on as well. I am now going to stretch it out. So this is where my acrylic plate comes in handy, because it's nice and flat and it saves, I mean, you could use your hands, but when you use your hands, you end up with the finger, it's not even, you end up with bumps where your fingers are. So I do like to use the acrylic plate, and by just doing it like this, it's just stretching it down, making it longer. It's important in those first steps when you conditioned and made the original log of clay that all bits of air were squeezed out. Sometimes if the air is not squeezed out properly during this process, your clay begins to sort of shred and come apart. So just make sure that it is nicely conditioned and a tight log to start with. Now I'm loving the way that these colours have stretched, and I'm just going to cut my strand now in half. I don't know what to call it. A strand, a log, a worm, a snake, so many different things. All right, so they're in half and they're nice and even. I was talking earlier about the guides for the shapes of our hoops, and so this time I'm going to use my circular shape cutter. I'm going to do this on the baking tray, because that way I won't have to move my pieces around too much, because I don't want to distort them once I've got them into that circular shape. So I'm going to wrap my clay now around the cutter to give it that circular shape. And just to even it off nicely on the ends, I'm just going to use my scalpel blade here, and I'm just going to chop the ends to make sure that they are nice and flat, because that's where we'll be gluing the earring post later, and it's nice just to have a nice even end on it as well. So I'm just going to gently remove the cutter there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can get really creative with your guides. So I'm just using the metal circular shape cutter at the moment, but you could use things like bottle tops, glass jars, anything like that that's not going to burn in the oven. Now, I could also go on the internal of the shape cutter if I didn't want them to be quite as big as what they are. So obviously going on the internal is going to make it smaller than going on the external of it. Honestly, there is so many choices of things you can do with hoops. We're going to talk about a few different ones today. But yeah, I'm just trying to give you guys ideas as well, because I just can't cover everything, unfortunately. Maybe I might have to do a second tutorial. I don't know. Okay, on to hoop number 2, and we're going to be using an extruder. So I like to use the windy extruder, so much more easier on my hands than the push type. And I'm selecting the disc that has the largest round circle. Now I've got my piece of clay here. It is a scrappy piece. It's got a bit of gold foil through it. I'm hoping the gold foil shows up, but if it doesn't, we can add a little bit more. Yeah, but I really like this colour. Now, if you don't have an extruder handy, that's okay. You can still just use the same technique that we used in that for the first lot of hoops. So just using an acrylic plate or something flat and smooth just to roll out your clay. So again, I've chosen the largest circle disc for the extruder, and I'm just going to wind it and get a nice big long strand of this clay out of it. If you find that your ends have gone a little bit wibbly wobbly, that's where I just use the plate just to smooth them out. And I've noticed that the gold foil hasn't shown through quite as well as what I would have liked. So I'm just going to add a few more little pieces just around it randomly, just so that it's got that little bit of sparkle back through it again. And so once I'm happy with that foil on there, I'm just going to give it a slight little roll there just to push the foil down. And I'm going to grab my heart shape cutter that I had to the side. I'm going to pop it on the baking tray because it's going to make it a little bit easier doing this shape. Now I'm just cutting the ends off just to make sure that they're a nice sharp end. So I've learned that I need to start at the edge here, not at the point in the center of the heart. So I'm going to start on the edge here, and I'm just going to very carefully wind my piece of clay around and just keeping it nice and close to the edge of the shape cutter. This is going to help it to take on the shape of the cutter. Now this little indent on the top of the heart, it gets me every time. I'm just going to really gently push it and just maneuver around the edge here, just so that it takes on that nice heart shape. So I'm going to grab my silicone brush here, and I'm actually just going to use the end of it just to help push it into that point there. Now you might be thinking, why didn't I start the heart with the end of the polymer clay in that point? The reason is we are going to be chopping out this side piece afterwards. So if your clay doesn't hold properly, then your earring can get wrecked later. So I'm just going to chop this bit now, so that this is the part that's going to end up having the stud on it. So then it will come from, the heart will start from the ear and then work out. So yeah, I like to have it just as one continuous piece of clay, so that way the clay isn't weak with any joins. And so I'm just going to pop this first one into the oven and just bake it up for about 10 minutes and then remove the cutter, and then I'll be able to do the second one. Now, whilst they're baking, we're going to get on with our next set of hoops. And this time I'm going to use Fimo leather. Now, Fimo leather is quite well known for being difficult to work with, I'll be honest, but the secret is just to get it nice and warm and well conditioned. I've actually done a full YouTube tutorial all about Fimo leather, so if you scroll back you will find, and I'll try and put a note in the description box as well, and then that will give you some tips and tricks on how to use Fimo leather. Now, it is completely different to using other clays that I usually work with, like Sculpey Primo, Souffle, even your normal Fimo Soft. Yeah, it is a lot tougher and it does take a little bit more to condition. So I'm just going to work on this for a while, getting it soft and workable. This packet is also kind of old, so it does require quite a bit of conditioning. But in saying that, I love the effect when it is finished. So it has that nice leathery, gritty feeling to it. It also keeps that nice flexibility that polymer clay does, and it is also quite tough and strong as well, so it won't rip or tear like, say, a normal leather or leatherette might do. And just another point that I should point out is that it doesn't really like the pasta machine a lot. It tends to crumble quite a lot going through it if you put it through before it is conditioned. So I just like to hand roll this, use my hands and my acrylic roller to condition it. Another thing that I really do love about Fimo leather is that it has really on-trend colours at the moment. So I love this rust colour. Now, I don't know if you can sort of see that bit of texture that it has to it. I have rolled it a slight bit thicker than what I probably would roll my normal earrings. And I'm going to use my metal shape cutter to cut out some hexagons. So again, because this is Fimo leather, it is a little bit tougher, and sometimes after I've used my shape cutter, I do like to just run my scalpel knife around the cut mark just to make sure that it has cut through properly. Yep, definitely going to need an extra little cut there. Right, now I've got my two hexagons cut out. We're going to do the internal hexagon to make these a hollow shape. So I just need to make sure that I line it up nicely in the center and then cut out those internal pieces. So I'm just grabbing my scalpel knife again, and we're going to cut out a section of each of the hexagons. Now, I didn't cut this one too evenly, so cutting out this section here will make them look a little bit more even than how I've actually cut it. And this is what's creating them into that hoop shape. Now, I'm not normally one for embedding posts, but for this style I actually love embedding, and I have an awesome little trick to show you. So I've got my earring posts here, and I'm going to grab a couple of... So it's a little bit fiddly, but I'm going to fold up both of the edges of this pad here so that they're in the center. Then I'm going to give it a nice squeeze and flatten that pad so that it's nice and flat. And so the next thing to do is grab back that scalpel knife again and grab my piece of clay here, and I'm just going to put a slit into the top where I want the post to go. So I'm kind of cutting that shape in half at the top there, being really careful not to cut my fingers. So then we can insert that pad and post into that slice there. And then we're able, because these pieces aren't baked yet, we just can squeeze the clay around it to secure that in. Now, if you wanted to add some liquid clay for extra hold, you could definitely do that. I've found, however, that because I'm encasing that pad in, I find that that's enough hold. And I'm just going to grab my little silicone tip tool here just to help push back that clay and just make it nice and smooth around the edges again. If you didn't have a silicone tip, you can obviously just use your fingers or whatever other tools you have on hand. And I'll just repeat the process again with the second one, just encasing that in there and squeezing it closed like so and smoothing it out. There we go. And so I will pop those into the oven and get them all baked up. So our next pair of hoops that we're going to make, we're going to use a cane to decorate. So it's going to be pretty similar to our first style that we made, but this time they're going to be a lot more colourful because of the cane that we're going to create. So I've just got my black clay here and I'm just going to get that nice and conditioned and soft. So I'll just do that with the acrylic roller first, and then once it's soft enough, which this one's quite soft already, I'm just going to start popping it through the pasta machine here. And then after a couple of times through, I'm just going to move the machine down to the thinnest setting, and I'm just going to pop it through again just to thin out that piece of clay. Okay, so onto the coloured pieces. I've conditioned all of these ones up, and now I'm just going to roll each one and then pop it into the black like so, giving each one a black border. So I want each one to be a little bit different in thicknesses. So I want some to be skinny, some to be thick, so they're not all the same. I like the look of the cane when they are all a little bit different rather than all being the same. So the definition of a polymer clay cane is a log of polymer clay that has a design that runs all the way through it. This cane here is probably one of the most simplest ones you can do. You can also do it without the black border, and that also looks just as effective. If making canes is something that interests you and you'd like to explore a little more, I have previously done a tutorial with some super simple beginner canes as well. So I'll link to that in the description box so you can check that one out if you like. But now we're up to the assembling stage of this one. So I'm just going to pop all my colours in together, and I want to create a bit of a square shape around the outside. So squares work well, triangles work well, because you're going to tile your pieces once you've cut them. So some people like to do circles and just roll them, but I find that you get too much of a gap. So I'm going to use my acrylic plate here, just squishing it down to what's called reduce the cane. I'm going to make it smaller than what it started at, but longer. So the design's going to be smaller, but the cane itself is going to be nice and long, so that I'll be able to chop it into lots of pieces to use for my tiling effect. Right, so the reveal on what it now looks like. So now we've got the decoration sorted, we now need to work on the actual hoop. So once again, I've just cut some black clay and I'm just going to get it conditioned and then pop through my extruder. And once again, we've chosen the largest circle disc to use. So now we're ready to chop the cane up into slices. So I want to try and make each slice only a couple of millimeters thick. My usual earrings that I would make if I was doing a flat pair, I would do it about 3 millimeters thick. I don't want these to be as thick as that, so probably only 1 to 2 millimeters if possible. We're going to be wrapping this around that black strand that I just extruded. So we don't want them to be too thick, otherwise the earrings will end up being too bulky. You'll notice as I'm slicing this, I'm rotating the cane around. That's just because it is quite a warm day and this cane is quite soft. So as I'm cutting, it's distorting it a little bit. So I'm just trying to keep the pieces around the same size, around the same shape, sorry. So yeah, I'm just rotating it slightly and just trying to keep that consistent shape. Now for the wrapping and decorating stage. So I'm going to take each one of these tiles that I've now cut and we're going to wrap it around the black. So I'm going to alternate between front and back because I don't want to have a line going down where the join is. So by going front ways and back ways, I will then go along in a minute and fill the gaps with half a piece. Now at this stage you may find that it's looking a little bit uneven, maybe a little bit bumpy and not quite perfect. In a moment we're going to roll it down and that's going to stretch the colours a little bit, it's going to help fill the gaps. So if your pieces that you've cut are a little bit uneven, don't worry too much because as we roll it down it's going to hopefully fix itself. Once you're happy with how your design looks, we're going to grab our acrylic plate back and we're going to roll it down. So as I mentioned before, this is going to smooth out any of those uneven pieces that you may have, and it's also going to help to stretch it out a little bit so that it's not quite as thick and chunky. So I've decided that I'm going to make the 2 earrings out of this piece, so I want to stretch it enough to be able to get both of the hoops out of it. So for these hoops, I'm going to grab back my rings that I made out of the kitchen towel tube, and we're going to wrap the clay around these. Now, because they're made of cardboard, they can be baked in the oven, so they can be in there for the full duration of the curing time. Now, if you wanted to go on the inside of them, you could do that, but today I'm going to go on the outside. I'm going to start by just trimming the end off just so that we have that nice flat end before I just wrap it around. And I want to go about 3/4 of the way around the tube. If you feel you're not the best at estimating the same positioning on both hoops, you can always mark your tube so that you know where to make your cut marks. If you don't want to do that, you could always partially bake, stack the 2 pieces on top of each other and trim it down so that they're both even. Okay, so I don't know if my last comment there was a little bit confusing, so I just thought I would show you what I meant by that. So these ones have just had about 10 minutes in the oven. I'm going to just peel them off of the cardboard there. So they're still only just partially baked, so they're quite flexible and come off those rolls nice and easy. And I'm just going to pop them on top of each other like this. And because the clay isn't fully cured, it is really easy just to use the scalpel knife and chop through. This will just even it off and make sure that they are of equal size. And once I'm happy with how they are looking, I'm just going to pop them back in the oven to complete their baking. So one of the advantages to having these little cardboard tubes as well is when we go for putting the stud tops on the top of our hoops, we're able to sit them into these shapes. The metal ones also work if you get the right angle. It makes it easier because you can angle your hoop so that the bit where we're gluing is nice and flat. And if you were going to be doing embedding with, say, liquid clay or with a piece of clay over the top, you would be able to pop these back in the oven too. But yeah, they sit nicely, especially in these cardboard tubes, because you can kind of squish them a little bit to make them sit nicely. Now this isn't the only way, of course, to hold your hoops whilst you're gluing the posts on. I've seen lots of other great ideas that people have had, such as filling a container with rice or sand or corn flour or something that's going to hold the hoops and keep them level whilst you glue them on. So you can get creative with this, find what works really well for you. I like using the guides because I already have them and they are easy to store. Okay, so I titled this tutorial Hoops and Huggies, and so we've covered the main part of hoops, but I just thought I would share this Instagram reel that I did. It's kind of half a hoop, half a huggy, so it kind of transitions in the middle between me showing you the two types. So I've stacked my polymer clay slab here to make it nice and thick, and I am removing 1/4 of each circle out. Now I'm just doing that little trick again with squishing the posts, and I'm going to embed them into this shape. So again, just slicing the top corner and popping the post in. Now these little hoop huggies come in perfect, and I'm doing the sandpaper trick to make them have texture. On to our next huggy design, and this one is super simple. So once again, I've pulled out my extruder, but this time I'm going to find the long flat disc. So I decided that this colour here would be perfect to do just a really simple pair of earrings for. The colour was mixed up by a bunch of scraps and I actually really like it, but unfortunately I can never recreate it again. I need to make sure that this is nice and straight and that it has a nice sharp edge on it. So part of this design, we are going to embed the post again. So I'm just going to pick it up at the end here and poke the post through the clay, like so, and then fold the clay over to embed it in. I need to make sure that the post is nicely secure in there. So I'm just going to grab my knife and cut down about 2 to 3 centimeters just to release it from the rest of the clay there. And then I'm just going to pinch around the edges where the post is just to make sure that that is all nicely enclosed. Now, once again, you can use some liquid clay if you would like to for additional hold, but I'm just going to use the clay and I'm just going to smooth these edges with the silicone tip just to make it look like one piece of clay. And once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to create my little curve here, and I'm just going to make sure that it comes up just below where the post is to allow enough space for my earlobe to go. And I'll just pop this into fast motion whilst I do the matching earring. And just because I cut this one a little bit shorter, I'll just trim down the first one so that they're nice and even. And this brings us to our final little huggy. And what I'm going to do is put down a base piece of clay. It doesn't matter that it's got a little bit of a mark in it. I'm just going to tile the remainders, the leftovers of my cane from before. I'm just going to tile that onto this piece of clay. And once I'm happy with how they are positioned, I'm just going to grab my acrylic roller and give it a little roll in both directions just to squish it out a little bit and fill any of those gaps. I've chosen to use an arch shape cutter for these Huggies just because I like the flat top and the rounded bottom. So you could definitely use any other shape. You could freehand cut. You can get creative and do it however you like. Yes, I've just chosen to use this arch for that. I'm just going to use the flexi blade to release it from the tile and just smooth off around the edges. I love how that background is that nice hot pink colour. I'm just going to freehand shape these little Huggies. If you would prefer, you can always wrap them around something so that you get an even shape. I do like it to have that little bit more organic and not quite perfect shaping. When it comes to applying the backs to these, I'll glue them on the top bit once they have baked. And I thought I would just end with some shots of me modelling my gorgeous creations. So this is how they sit, and I am really happy with each of these Huggies and hoops. A huge thank you for joining me today for the tutorial. Hopefully you've picked up a few tips and tricks and a bit of inspiration for making some Huggies and hoops for yourself. I've had heaps of fun doing this, and I'm sure this will not be the last you'll see of these creations from me. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you again next time. Bye.